The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Stratford on Avon, everybody, for round 3. We're beginning this particular episode at a war memorial right there. We're going to take a closer look at that in a moment. There's a cracking view just behind that particular monument out into a huge valley. It's going to be great to have a look at, isn't it? And actually this whole village is going to be great to have a look at. There's all sorts of fantastic buildings in this place. Welcome to Snitterfield. Snitterfield, Snipe Open Land. Today in Stratford-on-Avon, we're taking on Snitterfield, and when I say taking on, I mean it. This is the biggest one we've been to so far in Warwickshire's most expansive district, and this has a lot to cover. Snitterfield is less than 1 mile to the north of the A46, which cuts across the Warwickshire countryside here en route to Coventry. A busy, thriving community, Snitterfield has connections to a former King of England, who fled one of the most well-known battles in our history via the village. As late as 1814, Snitterfield was instead spelt as the shortened Snitfield. It doesn't have a lot of ancient history. In fact, other than the Domesday Book entry, which was quite short, the earliest records only date to 1630. The early name of Snitterfield was Snitterfield, which literally means an open field of snipe. Snitterfield has, since at least 2001, been associated with wine. Welcombe Hill's Vineyard at Vine Cottage, south of the main village, produces wines from the Pinot Noir, Dornfelder and Bacchus grape varieties. In 2009, all 5 Welcombe Hill's wines entered in the Mercian Vineyards Association regional competition won medals. Snitterfield has Shakespearean connections too. These are reflected in the name of the building housing some of the village's other major employers, Prospero Barn. Prospero, if you don't know, was a character in The Tempest. And speaking of buildings, there's some corkers here, so let's get moving and check them all out. Driving from Fulbrook, I opted to keep the camera on the dashboard mount to film the hamlet of Ingon to the south of Snitterfield. Now, there's not much recorded history as far as Ingon goes, but I did find a few bits. In 1645, a village of pest houses were built at a place called the Hill, which bordered Ingon. These houses were used for people with the plague. By 1790, Ingon was a small hamlet with 4 farms and 2 cottages. One of these farms had a house upon which was mounted a lantern used to guide the people of Snitterfield to Stratford-on-Avon. Research shows that this lantern was mounted on Ingon Manor Farm, which today is a golf club. More on that later. I couldn't find much more, but more than making up for that would be the rich wine-producing land at this end of Snitterfield. Our path into the village using these narrow back roads will take us past Welcombe Hill's Vineyard. The vineyard was planted in 2001 on land that was previously owned by the Shakespeare family. It was part of Snitterfield Fruit Farm. However, it didn't start producing wine until 2018. Once its grapes have been harvested, they're taken to a winery in South Staffordshire, where they're crushed and pressed before being fermented into wine in steel tanks. It's then bottled and returned to Warwickshire. Its location at the top of Welcombe Hills faces south, and with good drainage to the River Avon, it's considered one of the ideal local places for growing grapes. Welcombe Hills has won several awards, including silver medals for its Shakespeare-themed white wines, Twelfth Night and The Tempest, and its red wine, Othello. Given this is Shakespeare country and wine is our favourite tipple here in the UK nowadays, there's always a lot of interest in the vineyard. As such, they accommodate for that by offering tours and wine tastings on selected dates. They also have an online shop, offer local delivery, and even have an adopt-a-vine scheme. Even if you live in Stratford, you may have driven past this without even realising it's there, given it's rather out of the way. On event days though, their entrance is marked with branded flags, so you don't miss it. Now, as well as the obvious Shakespeare connections the Vineyard has, there's others in Snitterfield. We're now on a road called the Green, which runs into the heart of the village. On the right hand side, somewhere, it was a little hard to determine where exactly, is Prospero Barn. Prospero is a character in the Shakespeare play The Tempest. It houses several Snitterfield employers like Structured Training Limited, Sales Pathways Limited and Productive OD Limited. Snitterfield has quite a few other employers within its boundaries, such as the Stratford Manor Hotel, a Mercedes-Benz dealership, and one of the United Kingdom's oldest established independent factoring brokerages, Factoring Partners. Before we can get walking properly, I opted to go to the War Memorial next, which sits high on the hill overlooking the valley below the village. Check out this awesome view, folks. There's a bench here where you can just admire the sheer beauty of the Warwickshire landscape. Isn't it awesome? The memorial itself is pretty cool too. It's a Latin cross with a bronze sword attached to its front face, which is mounted on a 4-stepped square base. The whole memorial stands on a raised grassy area accessed by 3 steps from the roadside. There are 42 names on this one, 35 of them are from World War I, whilst the remaining 7 are from World War II. I spent a few moments here before jumping back into the car and heading for today's starting point. Our walk begins at Snitterfield School at the village's central crossroads. There's been a school in the village since 1682. Snitterfielders are very proud of their school's heritage and equally proud to be part of such a vibrant local community. The school has around 100 pupils who are taught in 4 classes. With the exception of its reception class, these are mixed year groups. As part of the Stratford Rural Schools Federation, Snitterfield benefits from the expertise and resources that are shared across its partner schools. The building dates back to the 1880s and still retains many traditional features. It has a well-developed forest school area located to the rear, as well as an independent, privately owned day nursery on site too. Over the road is the former Methodist Church, which was recently sold to a Stratford family for £385,000. Previously, the building served as a church for 134 years. The buyers, who bought the property at an auction held at Henley Golf Club, have plans to convert it into a family home. Most of Snitterfield's major features are bunched together around this crossroads. It's only a few steps to the next one. This is Snitterfield Village Hall. It's a building with a rich history that's been hosting events and activities for almost 90 years. It was built in 1931 and during World War II it was used as an emergency rest centre for homeless refugees. Later uses saw first aid lectures held here, and the local Women's Institute used it for jam making too. Many of Snitterfield's clubs and societies use it today. It's all run by a committee which organises fundraising events to help maintain and improve the hall. There was also a village institute in Snitterfield at one time, which consisted of a reading and newsroom, a library and a billiards room. However, it was decided that the parish council could not warrant the upkeep of both buildings, and so the institute was sold and converted into 3 dwellings. Up the hill, next we've got the Snitterfield Arms, a traditional pub with a lawned beer garden, an open fire in the winter and a choice of real ales. As pubs go, there's not much in the way of any recorded history here, but I can at least explain its name, and by extension, the name of the village. Snitterfield means open field of snipe, a reference to the large population of snipe that lived in the meadows near the Sherborne Brook. A snipe is any of about 26 wading bird species, characterised by their very long, slender bills and eyes placed high on their heads. As wading birds, they're commonly found in marshy areas and wet meadows, and typically have brown, camouflage plumage. There's nothing quite like the sound of a ride-on lawnmower. I quite like it because where I used to live, the village I used to live in, we used to back onto the playing field, and when there was a cricket match on, you could always hear the ride-on lawnmower in the background. It's how you know you're close to a sports field, I suppose. And there is one here. He's happily just minding his own business, cutting the grass over there. Hopefully we're not going to get in his way. I'm going to cross this playing field and get to the other side. Anyone for a game of cricket? Yes, this is indeed the sporty area of the village. The playing fields span both sides of Wolverton Road, and they're a brilliant asset for a village of this size. Snitterfield has history with tennis, bowls and football, but it's cricket that the place is best known for. Cricket has been played in Snitterfield for at least 100 years. Randolph Pearson, a local sporting patron, donated land in the 1930s to build a cricket ground and pavilion. In reference to the birds, the club's badge features a common snipe perched on a cricket ball. In 1970, Snitterfield played a match against Cambridge University after a man by the name of Robin Ogg persuaded the principal of Corpus Christi College that it should happen. Matches were played on the ground right up until 1973, when, with the game in decline, the Bowls Club took over the land and developed what is now the bowling green. Let's make our way down the hill again now towards a brook. In doing so, we'll be passing the site of Snitterfield Hall Gasworks. They were located behind the houses on the left-hand side of Wolverton Road, some 100 metres south of the cricket ground. The site is marked on Ordnance Survey maps dated 1886. They produced gas for domestic use during the Industrial Revolution in order to provide light for factories, country houses, and indeed for industrial processes that required gas. Nothing remains of them now, and to the untrained eye, this area would seem just to be residential. It's one of those pieces of history that's hidden in plain sight. At the foot of the hill is a stream. This is the Sherborne Brook, which cuts the village into two pieces. It's alternatively known as Bell Brook, and that name was used by a former pub, the Bell Brook Inn. Today, the inn is known as Brook House. So Nikki has just asked me which way now. Well, you've got a choice here actually, because you can go in 4 directions, but the route I've planned is to head towards the church, and what we need to do here is we need to follow the line of the brook this way, down a footpath. It will take us past some rather large ponds, and then it will take a right turn towards the church and the cemetery. Now I know, Nikki, you'll be very interested in the cemetery, won't you?
Why?
Because you have a like of cemeteries, don't you?
I thought there was something interesting in it. But yeah,
well, there might be.
I mean, I always like a cemetery, you know me, but you know, with the way you've just said that, I thought, oh, maybe there's something in it that I need to see.
Well, there isn't as far as I know, but you never know. When we get there, there could be.
Could be.
Could be. Let's find out. There can be no denying that the countryside in these parts is undulating, but this is perhaps best seen in our next area. We're on a footpath here which crosses some excellently preserved ridge and furrow earthworks. It runs in a roughly straight line across these fields before turning sharply into a wooded area, one of several coppices and small woods around Snitterfield. Of particular note here are the 2 sizable ponds through which this passes. I reckon these were some sort of clay pits, but I'm not totally sure. It does seem likely though. British History Online mentions a number of old enclosures in Snitterfield, one of them being Brick Kiln Close. Given the evidence at hand here and the sheer number of old red brick houses in the village, I suspect this was the site of a brickworks. At this point, I'm going to chuck in a mention of some notable residents. They include Anne, Countess of Coventry, who settled here in 1726. Anne obtained some fame as a writer of religious works and died in 1763 at the age of 90. As we already know, Snitterfield is associated with Shakespeare in many ways. Here's another connection for you. Richard Shakespeare, the grandfather of the poet, also settled in Snitterfield, doing so in 1535. He died in 1560, but some of his descendants remained in the parish until the end of the 16th century. So even though we couldn't get a good, clear view of Prospero Barn earlier, there are other places in Snitterfield that do have that Shakespeare connection. Behind me there, you can see Shakespeare cottages. Now, let's continue on down Park Lane and then take a right turn. We're going to head into the cemetery and then back through the churchyard. We're now in Snitterfield Cemetery, around the back of the church. There's nobody famous buried in here, although if you want famous graves, you won't have to wait long for one. Watch tomorrow's episode and you'll see. This burial ground does, however, contain 5 Commonwealth war graves. Namely, these belong to Sergeants Thomas Williams and Joseph Morgan, Privates Frank Robinson and Cyril Williams, and Thomas Smith, a driver in the Royal Army Service Corps. So to the church. This is dedicated to St James the Great and consists of a chancel, a nave, north and south aisles, and a west tower. There are also modern vestries north of the chancel and south of the tower. The sequence of the earlier development of the building is a little uncertain owing to the proximity of the various periods, and some confusion is caused by later alterations. The south arcade probably dates from the latter half of the 13th century and the north from the early 14th century. The tower was built in phases, with construction interrupted by the Black Death. The whole church was extensively restored in 1852, and later, in 2020, the bells were rehung and a second hand bell was added to replace a third bell, which was retired. William Shakespeare's grandfather worshipped at this church, and his father John was baptised here. With that behind us, it's now time to head for the village shop along this, the penultimate street. Snitterfield is effectively a massive rectangle, and this road will complete 3 sides of this elongated quadrilateral.
Well, I thought I'd lost my wife there for a little bit, because I'm there taking shots of all these beautiful houses, and Nikki was like a half a mile ahead of me. I've had to put on the afterburners to catch up with her a little bit. So yeah, you found yourself a nice little perch here, I see, on a nice triangle of land that's opposite the village shop, and that's the final landmark in the village. But it's not the final landmark in the parish, and we'll see why in a few moments.
So here is the shop, and it's the only retail facility the village has, unless you count the Snitterfield Arms. It doubles as the post office too. Now, we've come all the way through the village and haven't yet talked about Snitterfield's connection to a former King of England. As we walk the final few steps, let's put that right. After the Battle of Worcester in 1651, King Charles II made his escape through Snitterfield. Today you can follow a long-distance footpath called the Monarchs Way, loosely based on the escape route that he took after his defeat. He was disguised as William Jackson, a servant to the sister of a royalist officer, whilst being hotly pursued by Oliver Cromwell's men. The path stretches for 625 miles, 35 of which pass through Warwickshire, taking in not just Snitterfield, but several other places we will see in the future. Keep it in mind. To the west of the village, there are 3 more landmarks to cover. First up, it's Snitterfield Bushes. This is a natural forest which for centuries was used for timber, agriculture and common pasture. It's nowhere near as big as it used to be, and you'll see why in a moment. As a nature reserve, it's quite a good place to walk your dog or just take a gentle stroll. In doing either activity, you can still see old ridge and furrow plough markings in some areas of the reserve. You can come here all year round, but visiting during the spring is perhaps among the most recommended of times. That way you can enjoy an exquisite carpet of bluebells, primroses and early purple orchids. Autumn brings an impressive selection of fungi, including puffball, milkcaps and bolets. Roe and fallow deer can be seen quietly feeding among the trees, while badgers and foxes are regular visitors to the reserve too. Just beyond Snitterfield Bushes we have Stratford Oaks Golf Course and its accompanying driving range. This was completed in 1992 and it's an 18-hole, 6,575-yard par 72 course. It was officially opened by European Tour professional Paul Broadhurst and celebrity guests John Conter and Neil Ridgely. The club can offer accommodation for up to 64 guests. The course is built on the northern part of a former RAF station, and luckily for us, we can drive onto the rest of it. RAF Snitterfield was operational during World War II, built on land that formed part of Snitterfield Bushes. It was clearfelled to make space for the airfield. It was finished in around 1942 and cost around £1.1 million to build. It only lasted for 3 years, operational as it was between 1943 and 1946. Primarily, it was a satellite airfield for RAF Church Lawford, but 2 Belgian training schools were based here during its time. Since closure, it's had a few uses. In 1948, RAF Snitterfield was one of 2 disused airfields given special consideration as to the suitability of hosting the British Grand Prix. In the end, RAF Silverstone was chosen as the venue instead. Don't worry, we will see that eventually. Currently, as we know, the northeastern section is the golf club. The southeastern section is now Stratford Gliding Club. Before these were built, there was a wireless transmission station here instead. The rest is an industrial estate, save for one small area on the southern edge. That is the Stratford Armouries, a military museum built in 2007. And that's it, folks. Snitterfield is complete. I'll see you for more tomorrow. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.